Welcome back to the channel. We're going to talk about the comic book shill media and why they can't even complain, right? I don't even know what this article is supposed to be about. The 10 harsh realities of buying modern comic books from CBR. And I don't think they got any of the harsh realities right. But here to talk to me about that is lifelong comic book fan and collector Doc. How you doing, buddy?
I'm more confused after reading this article than when I started with it, because I'm used to the shill media being really, really stupid and drawing the worst possible conclusions from any data set. But this time they're drawing, I couldn't even figure out what this guy was complaining about.
I'm not even sure what the point of the article. If you talk to me and you're like, what are the harsh realities of buying modern comics? I'll say the skyrocketing prices, the fact that all these shops are closing down. And they did mention that one at least. You know, the fact that there's far too many events, the fact that all the A-list creators just left at the exact same time and have never been replaced at Marvel and DC. So for the most part, the stories aren't very good. The fact that, especially at Marvel, you don't get good interior art anymore. None of that stuff is really mentioned other than there's less comic book shops.
Yeah. They missed the whole point of selling the exact same comic to the same buyer 35 times with variant cover schemes, with driving away any long-term reader by constantly changing the characters that they actually like.
Well, I would say that was a strength according to this writer, but this guy doesn't know what he's talking about. We're going to cover 4 of these because I ain't got time for the whole article. The first one, he says, the push for digital comics. There's a massive push to move toward digital comics right now. It's cheaper for publishing companies, more environmentally friendly, and easier for distribution. There are benefits to sticking to digital, but there are also many drawbacks. For starters, fans prefer being able to hold a physical copy of the comic they love in their hands. What's more, digital comic book copies can be lost forever, whereas there's more certainty with a physical copy. But nonetheless, the path to digital is moving ahead. Companies like Marvel have begun investing in digital exclusive comics, which essentially force consumers to sign up for the Marvel Unlimited app so that they don't miss anything. Some of the best indie comics of all time are lost through digital platforms as they are not prioritized above big companies. I don't understand, like, the push for digital is a problem with modern comic books. Is this just a problem with modern society? Like, you know, you do streaming now. You do streaming music, you do streaming television and movies, and yes, there are digital comic books out there, and if you're a collector, obviously digital comics are not going to be the place for you. But if you're somebody that's a casual reader that would like to read some comic books and you don't want cluttered to your house, for the most part, digital comics are a godsend.
Yeah, I mean, look, I hate digital comics. I'm the first one to ever say it, but the massive push toward it.
But as someone who hates digital comics, has anyone forced you to read a digital comic? Have you been put in a position where you could do nothing but read the digital version?
Not really, because here's the thing. All their digital exclusive comics have been utter and complete shit. And on the rare instance where they're actually even marginally like acceptable, a month later, they're in print anyway. Yes. I mean, even that Wolverine falling from space for 3 issues fucking Marvel Unlimited comic, I'm pretty sure that got published. We know the shitty X-Men Green book got published. Most of the rest of the things that are digital exclusives are garbage in the first place.
Well,
so nobody wants
the big one, Doc, obviously is DC's Injustice universe based off the video game stuff. And guess what? The trades were big sellers because they were all released physically eventually.
Yeah. Look, there's nobody putting a gun to my head to force me to read digital here. I mean, there was one like he almost got to something serious there with, digital comics can be lost forever because and this did connect to one of the other ones on there. You don't own anything with digital. That is going to be the biggest problem that will ever occur with digital and that will always keep people from wanting to be part of it. You don't own shit.
Unless they allow you to download the file, which some companies allow you to do.
But even then, oftentimes it's it has DRM on it. So you're going to have to get, approval. It has to connect back to a server, find out that it's still valid for you to be allowed to read it. So unless you can get DMR free, like PDFs of your stuff and store it locally, you'll never own it. And yeah, all the things that you buy can just vanish at the whim of a publisher, at the whim of a contract. Guess what? I will never have to worry about anybody coming in because my Micronauts comics aren't from Marvel anymore, and Hasbro is pitching a bitch about it.
I understand why people don't like digital comics and they prefer to stick with physical comics. It makes all the sense in the world to be. But it's not a harsh reality because it's not the only option. In fact, it's a secondary option to owning it physically. It still dominates the American market.
And while there might be this big push for it, guess what? It's still like 10, 11% of the market. And it'll never
when
be
it comes
more.
to DC and Marvel and American comics, obviously it's a little bit different from manga. But that's another discussion, Doc. Another harsh reality they mentioned is Marvel and DC dominate the industry. There are so many fantastic indie comics out there that subvert expectations and take their readers on a stunning narrative journey, but those indie comics are often left behind because two companies dominate the industry. Marvel and DC will get the majority of the focus on major platforms. Although comic book stores are trying to push readers towards alternative companies, it is fair to say that the industry isn't in the place that it once was. Dark Horse, Image, Boom Studios, for example, were major competitors during some periods. That is an absolute lie. There's never been a major competitor for DC and Marvel other than when Image first started up and then they kind of blew it up themselves. But this isn't a modern problem. Marvel and DC have dominated the industry for like over 60 years now. What the fuck are you talking about?
Yeah, this isn't a modern problem. It never was a modern problem. And the end of the day, Marvel and DC make superhero comics, generally speaking, and the superhero comic book genre is the dominant market presence. It hasn't changed in 60 years. It's not going to change even if they suck. That's still what's going to be. You have to make something better. And I feel like this whole complaint here is that, well, they suck and you're not undeservedly promoting
Here's
other
the problem,
stuff.
Doc. That the title of the comic book is, let's see it right here. 10 harsh realities of buying modern comic books. But that's not what this article is. It's 10 harsh realities of being an indie comic book fan.
Yeah, that's what there's weird times in this article where he starts talking about indies. While some comic book shops might really push people to indies, guess what? They know their bread and butter is still Marvel and DC. They know that that's where they get their biggest discounts, their biggest percentage off on their books, and where they can move enough volume to make it worthwhile. So sure, they want to push indies because they want more things, because they already know that they have a guaranteed sale in fucking Spider-Man and Batman every month, and there's a minimum number of books that they're going to move every month. So if they can get like a Saga to sell the same amount in their store as Batman and Spider-Man, guess what? They now have a third reliable thing to stand on for their own income. But this article was seemingly just obsessed with wanting indies to be better, but applying it to the entire industry. It didn't seem to make any goddamn sense.
It's not a modern problem. DC and Marvel have dominated for over 60 years. And as far as the life of the direct market, there's never been another status quo other than when Image was coming out. And they obviously bought a lot of those and it didn't work out for them. It turned out Image wasn't real competition.
Exactly. And even during like the 80s and 90s, when you had like the black and white indie explosion, guess what? It never challenged Marvel and DC. And like every other cycle with indie comics throughout all of comic book history, there's a temporary boom and then a bust, and then it'll repeat its cycle again and again and again, and it will never get bigger. Sorry.
This is another complaint they have. The comics heyday is over. Anyone who has experienced periods of time like the golden and silver age of comics, which I do not believe this person did, I don't think they're damn near anywhere that old, will know that there are ups and downs in the comic book industry. The medium has gone through some absolute highs and some real lows, but for buyers, it's clear that it's no longer the heyday for comics. Perhaps there will come a time when comics are more popular again, fueled by long-term cinematic saturation. With the industry striking in areas, there are few opportunities for indie publishers to fill those gaps. Once again, talking about this from an indie comic book perspective, obviously in an American indie comic book perspective, but if you look at the entire comic book industry in North America, DC and Marvel are indies now because they're absolutely getting smoked by Viz and Scholastic, and they're actually, not just talking about digital, but physical sales of comic books are better today than they ever have been. And there are probably more people in America reading comic books today, maybe not by percentage, but by just sheer volume today in America than there ever has been. They're just not reading all of his shitty indie comic books that are gender studies books.
Well, they're not reading indie comics, weird lesbian bicycle writing anthologies, and they're also not reading Batman and Superman and Spider-Man. They've all been replaced by fucking Dogman and Raina Telgemeier and whatever weird, I mean, I guess all you guys kind of like manga, but whatever, for me, it's the weird Japanese books that keep getting brought over. And you know what? They've pushed, they did the thing that I always said, Marvel and DC can't fail their way into indie comic success. What did manga and Scholastic do? They succeeded and buried Marvel and DC, turned them into minor players in a market that they used to own. And while at the same time, you see the monthly sales on big two superhero comics shrinking and shrinking and shrinking.
And another weird thing about this article, obviously he's talking about indie comic books there. And then the first two topics are obviously from an indie comic book reader perspective, but really the comics heyday for DC and Marvel is over. And thus it's affecting indie comic books. That's what's really happened. So where are you coming from?
Look, he's one of those people that refuses to believe that a rising tide, lifts all boats, and that in order for there to be a strong, successful indie market, you must also have a strong, successful Marvel and DC, because at least within the direct market, all the Scholastic and the manga, they're supported by the direct market, but they make all their money in what would essentially be the book market or the newsstand market, markets like that, where appeals and targets a much, much larger demographic. Marvel and DC used to do that. And would it help? What happened? It brought their sales up, and it also opened doors to thousands and thousands of indie creators that wanted to do something that was outside the norm for Marvel and DC. Well, Marvel and DC shrank themselves down. What happened? All the indie creators, they're struggling to sell 500 units now.
Well, and a lot of the good creators just abandon the industry altogether right now. I hope they come back. So the comics heyday isn't over. Maybe DC and Marvel's heyday is over, but hell, comic sales, just as far as revenue and the interest in comic books, is as great as it's ever been, at least by sheer volume. The last one we'll mention, not enough diversity. One of the harsh realities of buying comics throughout most eras of the industry is that there is a genuine lack of diversity in the material. Companies are beginning to move forward now with plans to ensure that the comics actually reflect their readership. What's perhaps most stark for the consumer, though, is that there is even less diversity within the talent actually creating the comic. New initiatives need to be put in place to help out ambitious comic book creators who haven't had the opportunities they deserve. That will lead to further points of view reflected in buyers' options. And I don't think this is a harsh reality of anybody. If there's not enough diversity in the pages of your comic books in 2023, when will there be enough? And if there's not enough diversity as far as the talent range, because you got to remember, a lot of these artists, they're not white. They're not from America. A lot of them are from South America. A lot of them are from Asia. A lot of them are from like Eastern Europe and stuff like that. A lot of the writers are being cast with the racial identity, gender identity, and sexual identity of the characters themselves now, which are far more diverse by design, which is actually proven to kind of run people off. And if it's not enough now, when will it ever be enough? It's absolutely insane to say that there's not enough diversity in comic books, and that's one of the harsh realities of modern comics and why it hasn't taken off. I don't get the point of view at all.
Well, he talks here about that will lead to further points of view reflected in the buyer's options. It's amusing to me that whenever it was a bunch of Jewish kids in the 60s, 70s, and then white kids in the 80s, you actually had much more diverse points of view from the characters. You had more diverse characters themselves. You had more diverse storytelling that actually did reflect a larger section, cross section of the populace, and that more people were reading. Everybody that felt like an outsider could read X-Men throughout the 80s and the 90s, and regardless of the fact that it was a series of different great artists of all ethnic and racial backgrounds, and some British white guy writing it. I mean, granted, he grew up in New York, but still, British white guy writing it, it reflected millions of people's experiences that can be reflected in the buyer's opinions and worldview.
What's interesting? He said we were going to see the actual readers themselves being expressed within the comic books. But if you read modern comics that DC and Marvel are putting out, you would think that at least 40% of the readership were lesbians, another 25% were gay men, and then another 15% of the readership were trans. And I don't think that bears out at all, Doc. I just have a suspicion that's not the actual reading demographic of Marvel or DC or even manga itself.
I'm gonna go with a big fat no. I mean, maybe they're trying to create that, but they're not going to do it by growth. All they're going to do is just drive off everybody that doesn't meet one of those diversity bingo check boxes, so that's the end result. It kind of reminds me of that the 40% of comic readers are women thing. Well, they got there not by growing the number of women, but by driving off the number of men. It's the same shit here. This doesn't actually reflect the demographics of the world or the country or anything anywhere. And they're talking about comic book creators who haven't had the opportunities that they deserve. Look, we've tried doing what's essentially affirmative action for fucking comic books. What has it done? It's driven off readers in droves. There's a fuck ton of creators in this industry right now that everybody said, well, they deserve an opportunity that they haven't been given yet. Well, guess what? We've been giving them opportunities. All the generic Stephanies, all of the weird, sex obsessed fetishists that keep ending up in comic books. We've tried giving them all the opportunities. What have they done? They've just driven off more fucking readers.
Because they forgot they needed to actually write superhero stories.
They forgot that they needed to write a story that anyone outside of just themselves and the little clique that they hang out with to obsessively talk about whatever their fetish is might be interested in.
Yeah, this is just a bad article. I don't even know what point of view it's being written from. At some points, it feels like it's from an indie comics perspective, then it's an American, maybe retailer perspective, and it's like, whatever. This thing was an absolute joke, and that's one of the big problems with CBR.
Exactly. It looks like they finally did get one thing, which is there are fewer comic book stores. Hey, yeah, guess what? That's a fucking problem. All the rest of these things, they're problems you people made up in your head.
It's not all bad at CBR. I do want to give them some credit here and there. In fact, recently I did a video on an article about maybe changing the political diversity within comic books and maybe encouraging it a little bit. And I thought this was a good step in the right direction. Although I don't think the writer of the article got there all the way, but it was very interesting to say the least. Definitely check this one out right here. There's also a link in the video description.